this exercise, you're going to be creating basic list reports. The goal of this exercise is to provide you with the first introduction to working with the Genero Report Designer. Don't worry too much about formatting at this point. You will be formatting the report in the labs for Module 6. For this first demonstration, or for the first lab exercise, we're going to go ahead and create an order list report. So I'm starting off with where I was in the last lab exercise, but I'm going to go now and start creating an order list report from my list report template. So I do File, New, I'm creating a report, and I select List Report, the report design from template, listreport.4rp. This opens up the list report template inside of my report designer. And if we look at it, there's two areas you can be working with here. You can work inside of the central workspace, and this is the GUI area where I can drag and drop information and drag and drop to organize. I also have a report structure up here, and the report structure is another view of this report. So I have a page header, and then I have a table row. Inside of the page header, I have a table header section. I also have they call stripe layouter here, or a stripe, that's containing my report title. You'll notice if I click on report title, it appears up here in the report structure tree expanded to highlight that object. So we have our list report template here that we're going to work with. Let's go ahead and save this now so that we have it saved in the correct directory. So I want to do a save as. First thing I want to do is replace the title name with an appropriate title, and I'm going to call this order list 1.4rp. Now I need to save this in the bin subdirectory. So our compiled files or executables are placed in a bin subdirectory. When the executable executes, we need it to be able to find the report. So let me go ahead and move this into the bin subdirectory as well. If I open up this now to look inside of my bin subdirectory, then my GRW class bin subdirectory, I now have this order list 1.4rp. I also want to stick it inside of my reports virtual folder. Now I have my report saved, and it's inside of my reports virtual folder. Next thing to do is to associate that RDD file with this report. In other words, when my report application runs, what information is being sent across. So I can open my schema file. I need to navigate and find that store order.rdd that was created when my report application was compiled. I select it and I click open. And now you can see we have the list of fields that are going to be streamed across on every row as each row is sent across by my report application. My next thing to do is to start placing these fields onto my report. I'm going to start by building out the table row. And so in other words, when each field is brought across, let me resize some of these. When each field is brought across, I want to identify which fields are going to be put out there inside of my table row stripe. So these containers are known as stripes. We have all these different stripes here, and I want to place things inside of my table row stripe. Now, when we're bringing across the fields for a list report, if you think of a list, it looks a lot like a table. We have rows going down and columns going across. So for this list report here, the first thing I need to do is select this icon up here that says create a table column value object. This deals with the default formatting of that field when it's brought across. Let me click on that icon, and then I need to drag and drop the fields that I wish to appear on the report inside of this table row. For this one, we're going to be using what's known as positional layouting. And that means that one column is going to snap into place after the other column. We already have a spacer, so we have a small spacer to start off our table row. If I bring this across, you can see that we have a spacer. So the next column, or the next field I bring across, I want it to snap next to that spacer. And the way I do that is hold down the Control key, and then I select the field I want to bring across. So I'm going to start with my store number. I'm holding my Control key. As I bring it across, oops, let me do this again. I hold down my Control key. As I bring it across, you can see a red line tells me where it's going to snap to. I want it to snap right next to that spacer inside of the table row. So once I see that red line appear, I can release it and it snaps into place. And a green dot lets me know that it's using positional placement. So I've added my store number. Let me go ahead and add a store name, again holding that control key, looking for my red line, letting it snap into place. Next one I'm going to bring across is the order number. So I'm going to go and find my orders.order number, hold down the control key, look for the red line, let it snap into place. Next one is going to be the stock number. I go and I find my stock number, hold the control key, right click on it, drag it, look for my red line and drop. I'm going to also now do the description, so holding down the control key, right click, drag and drop. You'll notice on this one it's not appearing here, and that's because the table row itself is just not wide enough to hold these fields, so it wrapped it around. It's still inside of that table row container, it's just had to wrap it around to the next line. So after description, let me just add a couple more. I'm going to add quantity. So there's quantity, hold down my control key, drag and drop, look for my red stripe, and release. And I also am going to do price. So I find price, hold down my control key, click, drag, drop, see the red line, and release. So at this point, I have my table row built, and it contains all of the various fields that I want to display in my list report. I want to also provide up in the table header, which we can see here, in my table header stripe, I want to provide the column headers. So let me go ahead. We're going to again position them next to the spacer that's been provided for us. Let me again hold down my control key. This time I need to go and I need to create a table column title object. Again, by selecting between these icons, we're saying what the default formatting is. By creating a table column title object, it's going to put the text associated with that field instead of putting the field data itself. So let me show you. We can start off again with that store number. So I hold down my control key, click on store num, drag and drop, look for my red line, and release. And you can see instead of putting the field or the data field identifier, it's actually putting in the text saying store num. I could drag and drop these out. An alternate way, however, I can just click on the table header, the parent object, and I can double click on these items to place them positionally. So we have store num already. I want to put store name next. I can double click and you can see the store name appears there, and it appears down in my report structure. I can see it visible in the list. You can see that instead of putting the value, it's putting the caption, and that's because I had this table column title object icon selected. So I know I'm working with my table header stripe. I have my store num and my store name. I also need to add the order num. I need to add the stock num. I need to add a description. I need to add a quantity, and I need to add a price. You can see that the double click method, it's allowed me to do this much faster than dragging and dropping. So just realize that you are able to work by drag and dropping within the GUI itself. Sometimes, however, you might find it easier to just work within the report structure panel. You'll notice that, and I pointed out that the rows wrap, and the reason they wrap is because it can't all fit within the width of that container, of that stripe container. The way we're going to solve this is we're going to change the dimensions of the report. We're going to change it from a portrait to a landscape report. So for this report, I'm going to do File, Report Properties, and change my paper settings. Instead of A4, I'm going to change this so that it's a letter paper, letter size, which is the American size, and then I'm going to change it to a landscape. When I click OK here, it's now in landscape mode, and landscape is wide enough to hold all of the fields that I want to display on my report, on my list report. Now that we have the basic report formatted, the next thing I need to do is work within the report structure to say what happens when a row is sent across, or what happens when there's a break on store num or a break on order num. And we do this by integrating the report we've designed with the trigger nodes. So the triggers, which you'll recognize from my order by clause, I could have actions happen when a store number changes, when the order number changes, and then what do I want to occur as each row is sent across, the on every row. Well, let me go ahead and grab my top trigger, my store num, and I'm going to place that after the page header. As I drag it down, you can see the line, you may be able to see these little lines expanding. I want it to go on the same level as table row, and on the same level as the page header. So I look for the appropriate line and I release. So right now we have our page header. Oops, actually I want it to go one more. Let me drag it out. There we go. So I have a page header, and then I have my triggers, and now as each row is sent across, I want it to print out a table row. So I take my table row and I drop it on top of on every row. Now as each row comes across, it's going to go and it's going to print that row's data. Let me go ahead and double click on this report structure to put it back inside of my Studio interface. My report has changed. That's why I have an asterisk here. Let's do one more thing. I'm going to change the report title. I've clicked on the report title. You'll see it's highlighted it inside of the report structure. And now that the properties that are being displayed relate to this report title. I'm going to go down until I find the text. And instead of report title here, let me change this so that it says order list report. Order list report. You can see that it's changed the name up here on my report itself. Let me go ahead and save this. I've now saved my report design. And now my report definition document is ready to be used. I need to go into my main module here, and instead of report name, I want it to run the order list 1. I change it to say order list 1, and I'm going to save it. Let me go back to my project view. Let me execute this application, or let me rebuild this application first. We can see down in the panel, it's rebuilding the application. It's asking, saying, I've created a new RDD, which it did because every time we compile, that --build-RDD recreates the RDD for us. Do I want to use that in the report? Yes, I do. Now I have my application compiled. I can go ahead and execute my application. We can see the application is being executed. It finishes and it spits out my order list report in the report viewer. I have it set up to go to SVG, and it looks as we expect. It says order list report at the top. I have my column headers, and then for every row that's sent across, it's printing that row's data onto my report. I can cycle through this report. I can cycle back. For a second example, we're going to do the same thing by creating a store list report. So in this one, we're going to create a report that simply lists the store number and the store name of all stores that have placed orders. So to do this one, let me go ahead and create a new list report. I've created from the template. We have our template up here again. I'll go ahead and change the title now so that it's, instead of saying report title here, it's going to say store list report. And now I want to go ahead and I want to populate my table header. And I also want to populate my table row. Well, first thing, let me go ahead and get my data schema. I go to my store order. It's put my trigger nodes in as I expected. If I want to reorganize these now, I can, because I know how I want them to look. Within the page root, I want to have the page header first. I then want to have my trigger nodes. And this one, you may have to fiddle around until you get it at the same levels. I have my page header, I have my trigger nodes, and then I have my table row. And for now, that's going to be fine. Let me go ahead and populate my table row. In this one, I only want the store number and the store name of those stores that have placed orders. So I can select my table row. I can go, and again, I want to now change this so that it's a table, the value object, table column value object. And I'm going to use the double click method. So I'm going to put out there my store number. And I'm going to put out the store name. Inside of my table header, I want to put the table column title object. So I click on this icon. And again, I'm going to have the store number and store name. you'll notice that on my case, I click them backwards. I can move this around. So if I want I want the store num to be the first on both, I can just move it around. I can move it around in the structure view. I could have also moved it around by dragging and dropping within the report itself. So I could have clicked on this table customer object and dragged it and moved it around this way as well. At this point, let me go ahead and pull out my report structure. I have my page header with the table header, and I can see it has the spacer followed by the store number caption, followed by the store name caption. On the table row, I have the spacer followed by the store num and followed by the store name. The next decision I have to make is where I want this table row printed out. Now, do I want it printed out on every row that's sent across? Well, not really, because if a data row has multiple orders and multiple items, that store number and store name is just going to be listed multiple times. This is an instance where every time the store number changes, every time I have a new store coming in, that's when I wanted to print out the store number and store name. So I take this table row and I place it underneath the store number trigger. Now, every time the store number changes, it's going to go ahead and print out a new row. Let me double click to put my report structure back in. I could, again, visually look at my report and see if it's how I want it to look like. And so far, it's looking good. Let me go ahead and save this report. Remember, when you save it, you need to save it in the bin subdirectory. Let me navigate into the bin subdirectory. And this one I'm going to call store list1.4rp. I'm going to put it inside of that reports virtual folder. I'm going to go back into my main. This time, instead of running the order list one, I'm going to have it run the store list one. Let me save my changes there. Now I can go back to my project view. I can rebuild it. And now I can execute it. The report executes. If I view, I now have a list of all those stores that have active orders or items inside of my database. Now in these examples, you'll see I'm going in and I'm changing the report main.4gl, that main stub, to specify which report I want to run. If you wanted to have an easier way to do it, you could take a look at our reports demo, where they've created that little window interface so that you select a report from the list and it is that report that's run. However, for these labs, we're going to be going in and just changing that report main to call the report that we want to execute or that we want to use to display the data each time.